But I really believe at the end of the day, strategies we can develop, get the right smart people in the room, we can figure that out. But the thing that we really can't get right very easily is getting the right people and the right relationships. Keith has done a lot of great things in his career. He was CMO and head of sales for Starwood. He was the CMO for Deloitte & Touche. So he's had a lot of strong business background. But what I think Keith does particularly well is focus on the point that people are important, but most important is the relationships. And when I was thinking about this meeting, we were looking at potential folks to talk with us and to push us on our professional growth and our personal growth. We looked at a lot of different people. But we sort of kept coming back to the fact that Keith really understood how to make that more personal and how to really focus on what I think is one of the biggest opportunities we still have in this company, and that is continuing to develop stronger personal relationships between each of our people and really leveraging them to build the trust that's really required in order to drive our business forward. So you were all going to get a copy of Keith's books. But unfortunately, we found out after the fact that if you try to ship more than 99 books into China, they'll get caught in customs, and we had to send them back. So there's a sign-up sheet out there for those of you who would like the book, and we'll make sure we get it to you. So we apologize for that. But other than that, I just want to ask Keith to come up and talk to us and enjoy the next hour. And Keith will also be spending some time in the breakout pushing some of these ideas and concepts forward. And I also want to thank Keith for one thing. I've seen over my career, which is really short actually, I've seen, that's another bad joke, I've seen a lot of different people to come and speak at different things like this. I have never seen anybody like Keith who spent his time, invested his personal time this past Sunday evening and through this meeting, who's really tried to reach out and connect to people. And it's been very interesting to me to hear the insights that he has from those investments. So Keith?
Thanks, Bob. So I try as best as I possibly can to get to know an audience, and obviously coming a few days in advance and eating with you and getting a chance to drink with you and have breakfast, etc., is one piece of it. But I want to do a very quick psychographic survey of the audience. We are a research-based company, so this is a small sliver of that research. Take out a piece of paper in front of you, please. And what I want you to do is I'm going to read 4 shapes. And whichever one of those shapes most dominates your mind, whatever pops into the forefront first, don't question, ask, or judge why. Just go ahead and write the shape down. One of 4 shapes. Are you ready? A circle, a triangle, a square, a Z. Circle, triangle, square, Z. All right? Write them down. Just one. Whatever it is. If some of you can't figure out what to write down yet, that says something about you too, but we won't go there. All right, there we go. Perfect. All right, circles, raise your hands. Wow, okay, interesting. Not a surprise with a group of senior leadership like this. Circles tend to be out-of-the-box thinkers. They tend to embrace change. They tend to recognize that relationships are critical to getting the things done that they need to get done. So very positive things about circles. The thing about circles, though, is you specifically avoided anything that boxed you in, made you feel claustrophobic or tied in, sharp edges, straight sides, etc. As a result, 50% of this audience, a particularly undisciplined group of individuals, you 50%, all right? Triangles, raise your hands. Okay, good. Keep them up, keep them up, keep them up, keep them up. I see a few of you, and it's not a surprise. Because you know why? Triangles will do anything to get to the top of an organization as quickly as possible. These are the most ruthlessly blind individuals in the room. I saw Gustavo right there. He's like, absolutely a triangle. Perfect. No, I'm only slightly kidding. The thing about the triangles are just make sure that as you get to know them, you stay on their good side, okay? Who put a square? Who put a square? There's nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be ashamed of. It's okay, the world needs accountants too. It's good. But the squares are the individuals with rigor and discipline in their lives. They're the individuals that step up and actually are able to perform with great degree of process. And by the way, does not mean that they're antisocial. Does not mean that they're not capable of relating to other people. They go to events like this. They connect to people. They collect business cards. It's just that the people who put a square down every single night go home and enter the names into a database. That's who they are. And in fact, those are the only ones in your entire company using your CRM system, all right? And then there's the Z's. Then there's the Z's. Don't raise your hands. I would never do that in front of your peers and associates for the Z's. Z's, just preoccupied with booze and sex. We have... By the way, where is Juan Ernesto and the whole Latin American team? No, I'm only slightly kidding. The Z's are the nonconformists. The Z's are the individuals who, normal shapes and sizes, I'm going to do it my way, so to speak, and forge my own path. Rest assured, what we just did was not statistically significant. But what it does begin to show is that everybody in this room has a slightly different, unique style to yourself as how you migrate into the professional relationships of your life. There are other tools and social styles that we can use, such as the Johari window. Some of you bound into the room with big windows open. Others of you walk in much quieter. And what's very important is to recognize that what humanity is looking for mostly, and when we started our firm, we started a firm with a research basis. And by the way, the reason the lights are up today, and the reason that this conversation and I'm down here, is because I really do and I will turn this into a more interactive conversation, a dialogue, moving to real action. My intent is not just to entertain you, doing jokes and sock puppets or whatever I could possibly do. My intent is hopefully to get you to think about something and perhaps leave this room and say, I think I'm going to try something a little bit different or take a little bit more of a risk. And then I've been successful. Otherwise, I'm just corporate entertainment, and that's not what I flew around the world to do. But our firm is based on a lot of research. We have a core group of researchers, anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, and those individuals study human behavior in the workplace. And we study human behavior and we relate that human behavior in different types of human behavior. We relate it to high performance. And that's the research component of what we do. And we quantify that very rigorously. But the next thing that we do is, because we're not just a research and a group of academics, we're an intervention arm. We intend, and we will show you today, not only some interesting insights, but hopefully we'll show you a roadmap for how you can apply those insights to your lives, with your teams, and in your organization. So the entire intent is to really focus on something that it really is a set of mindsets, a set of processes, and a set of skills that will make you as individuals higher performing, similar to literally the thousands of teams globally that we have studied. Thousands of teams globally that we have studied. And what we do is we actually, first and foremost, try to pick apart the components of the highest performing teams on a global basis, and then we backward integrate as to how one can actually accelerate the creation of such a team. Because I don't want you to have to wait for time and serendipity and chance to become a high-performing team. I don't want you to have to wait for the magical leader to do it for you. I want to be able to give all of you in your own lives professionally a simple set of steps that you can emulate the great teams of the world, to be able to begin to emulate that and get that high performance. And I do say globally, by the way, one of the things that I've noticed in studying these teams is that the attributes of high-performing teams, no matter where you are around the world, are very similar. How they got there was different. Let me pause for that a second. Think about your own personal relationships on a global basis. It's a very global group. Think about the times you've gotten to care for and like people in this room. Once you're behind the walls, once you're behind the aspects of their cultural differences, people are people. They really are. But how you navigate to get there is what makes the difference. Does that make sense to you on a global basis? It's true of children. One of the things that my firm does is, when they send me around to do talks like this, we always raise money from our fan base, the people who read our books, etc. And I always spend 1 or 2 days at orphanages in the local community before I get a chance to talk. And so I've done so here in Shanghai, just did in Guatemala before I gave a talk there. And what we do in that process, I've found one very simple thing. High-performing teams and adults, once you become friends with them, are all the same. And children are all the same. They just want to be tickled. They just want attention. And it's amazing that what really is true of all of us, that anthropologically, we all go back to the same group of people out of Africa that 70,000 years ago were formed in small social subunits called tribes. And the highest performing tribes are where we long to be. We as humans were stamped in a DNA form on our forehead that we long to behave in an interrelationship with a set of tribes, because if you weren't a part of a tribe in the past, you were eaten by something. And as a result, there's this nature that wants to belong to something that's connected, powerful, and works. Does that make sense to everyone? So let me pause for a second and just ask you a question. What are some of the attributes of the great dream teams that you have experienced in the past? The great teams that made you get out of bed earlier in the morning. That when you worked in the weekends, you weren't resentful. You burned the night hours with these individuals. You traveled and you made sacrifices. And you were excited to do it. You were engaged and empowered and excited to do it. What were some of the attributes of those teams? Just give me some of the words you'd use to describe those teams. Friends. Trusting. Fun. Passionate. Did you say compassionate or passionate? Passionate. Supportive. Mutually supportive and being there for each other. Yes. Somebody in the back raised their hand. Trust. Compromise. Exactly. Same as marriages, right? Exactly. The same type of rules. One of the things you'll find in what we're talking about today is that the rules of relationships in the workplace and the rules of the interrelationships professionally are actually the same rules as relationships everywhere. At least the high-performing ones are. The high-performing relationships in the workplace are very similar to the high-performing relationships in friendships, significant others. And if you actually, we all need to do in our lives to be better performing humans, is we need to find a few key individuals that in our vernacular, our words, have your back. I'm not sure that translates well yet. The international rights have only recently been given to this book, so I'm not sure what the titles are going to be around the world, but we'll have to see. But who's got your back defines the attributes of the kind of people who won't let you down, the kind of people who literally won't let you fail, the kind of people that will kick you in the back end to make you perform at your highest, the kind of people in the world that will tell you the truth, because not enough people do tell us the truth. And in fact, the kind of people that you would want to hear the truth from, because most of us don't even ask for the truth. We'd rather live in our own worlds without hearing that. Does that make sense to people? So those high-performing teams that I just mentioned, now ask yourself a question. Are you in that team today? You don't have to raise your hands. Are you in that team today? And are you respectful enough of the other teams in this room that if you do believe you're in that team, are you respectful enough of the other teams in that room that you believe that they're in that team? Because what we find is that high-performing teams want to engage with other high-performing teams. And as a result, the way to get this organization really humming significantly across the board will be for not only every individual to make a commitment to yourself that I deserve that kind of team. And what's powerful and exciting is that it's a choice. Most of you think, as you think back to those high-performing teams of the past, that they are accidental, serendipitous. It just happened with chemistry. We got lucky. The environment of the time forced us to engage that way. But in actuality, what we can prove, in fact, we prove with a money-back guarantee, we can prove 100% that you can choose to engage in this way if everyone in this room decides that you're going to leave a little bit of hope that you can move in that direction. So I don't expect you to intellectually just say yes and do something about it. What we do in this room is we're going to give you some experiences that will hopefully let you suspend your disbelief and remember what it's like to be connected in that way. Because we don't believe instructional design has anything to do with what happens at the front of the room. Instructional design and changing people's behaviors and mindsets have to happen by you experiencing something different and liking it. And then when you experience something different and like it in this room, you might try it a little bit more out in the hallway. You might try it a little bit more at dinner tonight. You might try it a little bit more in your team, and it becomes contagious, and it rolls on, only because you like it. You can't punitively define what somebody has to do to change their mindset. You've got to entice them with positive experiences. All that makes sense? If it all makes sense, then we're going to try to get on with it. But before I do, I know that I want to make sure that you respect the data behind what we've created. Well, actually, even before I get there, let me define a little bit more what the actual attributes of those teams are. The most important attributes of those teams are what we call the performance aspects of the teams, which really means a hard driving aspect of the team. The aspect of the team that's willing to take risk and put themselves out there. All right? Now, those attributes have to do with two components, two values. One value is openness of communication and candor and transparency. Openness of communication, candor, transparency. Fundamentally, to boil it down, you've got to be willing to argue. You've got to be willing to push each other. You've got to be willing to have conflict in an organization to have high performance. Innovation does not occur if the individuals in the room have instincts or gut feelings that they don't feel safe enough to express. Innovation, whether it's process innovation for better supply chain, or whether it's innovations of talent management, or innovations of new product development, somebody had to say, I got an idea, let's create jeans as diapers. Now, if they didn't feel that that was an environment that they could take that risk in, they wouldn't have had that innovation idea. Does that make sense to you? So candor and transparency is absolutely critical. In the same, and we'll talk about the additional components of that. From a risk management perspective, that's important as well. If everybody in the room is quiet when the boss says that we should go this way, and everybody knows that going this way is going to end up in some trouble, for whatever reason, whether it's market trouble, or whether it's financial trouble, or whether it's ethics trouble, if everybody is quiet because you're conflict avoidant and moving in that direction, you're going to have some very significant damages at your hand. One of the things we're looking at right now is why is it that boards of directors of companies, in the risk management component of the boards of directors, don't look at culture? Why is it that there isn't an HR cultural assessment of risk management associated with large organizations? Because I guarantee you a lot of the challenges, and we can actually prove this, and we have in the financial services institutions of late that crashed the economy on a global basis, had to do with culture more than anything else. And we can go back to those issues. So the number one is candor. The other one is accountability, because candor does not mean consensus. Collaboration does not mean consensus. Now, if you get consensus, that's great. It's a nice attribute, but it's not necessary for high performance in teams. Consensus, if you're striving for consensus and you mandate consensus, consensus will actually be the death knell to innovation and the death knell to high performance, outstripping the competition. Because we can't necessarily have mediocrity if we're going to be high performers. And mediocrity is what you get if you mandate consensus. Does that make sense to people? Okay. And thank you for that. I might step in a little bit more and say, do you get it? So we can at least get a little bit of resonance there. So the accountability, the individual accountability, at the end of the day, someone's got to make a decision. And then when that person makes the decision, as long as you've had your word, as long as you've had your feedback, as long as you've had your voice, as long as you've had your say, then you've got to be on board to that individual's decision moving forward. Because too many of us, the problem is too many of us never feel that our say was able to be had, so we sit there resentful. We sit there resentful that our voice wasn't heard, that consensus was the mandate, when in actuality I wanted to be able to say, that's ridiculous, or I've got a better idea. And you sit there and you stew, and subconsciously, maybe even consciously, you wait for that person to fail, so that you can then say, I've told you so. Now, I'm sorry, this doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human, because you weren't given the respect of your voice in the first place. If you're not given the respect of your voice, then you're going to stew, and you're going to want to have your say at some point. And that's what happens in organizations that are often very polite. It often means that they're political. Polite organizations that don't have a voice ultimately can be organizations where people don't have their say, and as a result, have you ever, let me ask you a question, have you ever left a meeting and that's when the real conversations happened? Tom raised his hand to say yes, or you raised your hand to ask a question? You have, right. And if you've left a meeting, how ridiculous is that? You know how long that extrapolates the cycle time to good decisions? If the real information isn't had in the open so that everybody can hear it and everybody can come along with the transformation and the idea, then individuals will continue to stew because the real conversations happened over here without full information. Why is it our stock market, our capitalism, our economy is based on the recognition that full information is necessary? Otherwise, it's called insider trading. Transparency is what makes our system work. So more information, the better. Why is it that we do not do that for ourselves and in our businesses as well? Why don't we demand full information in the open, even when we don't want to hear it? But it doesn't mean that just because you demanded full information that you as leaders still don't have the say. You still have the authority and accountability. And we'll get back to a little bit about how, again, all of this is the theory, right? And the observations of the research, and we'll get back to the research specifically. Then we're going to get to the process. I will show you a roadmap by which how you can bring this into your teams more effectively as we've dissected how other companies have done it. So rest assured it will happen. Now, all of this being true, individual accountability, high degrees of candor being the performance aspects, what has to happen, and this is where we learn the most from anthropology, where we learn the most from how you're hardwired as a human. What has to happen for you to be able to live in that environment is that you have to feel safe. You have to feel safe. If I'm going to say, I disagree, what you have to know underneath that is, I respect you. I even like you. I will go to the ends of the earth to make you successful. And I think you have your head up your back end. But that's okay. But that's okay, because if the underlying sense of safety is there, people can push themselves further than they've ever pushed themselves before. Anthropologically, we need to feel safe. Does that make sense to you? Say, I got it. Now, the aspects of safety are boiled down into two attributes. First is, do you feel that the other person wants to help you? So when somebody says to you, I disagree, that's a silly idea, do you say, well, forget you? Or do you say, really? Tell me more? That all has to do with whether you feel safe. If somebody says, I totally think that's a bad idea, and you feel safe, your natural reaction is, really? Well, then tell me more, because I don't want to do something that's a bad idea. I know you like me, I know you care for me, I know you respect me. Now I want to hear more because you've got a point of view that I know, like, and respect, and I may disagree, but tell me more. If, on the other hand, the safety isn't there, then they're trying to shoot me down. They don't respect me. They don't like me. And my bristle is up, and I push away, and I close out my ears, and I don't want to hear the information. If you understand what I'm saying, say, you got it. Got it. Now, the two attributes, number one is I care enough about you to make you successful. The other thing is intimacy. Intimacy. You really do have to care about each other. Like, really. I mean, the words, if you really think about the boss, have you ever had a boss that really cared about your success? Don't raise your hands now. If you did, you'd do so many different things for that person. Your life was changed when you did, right? Because they cared. They cared about you. And now ask yourself the question, do you really believe that everybody that reports into you believes you care about their success? And then ask, why wouldn't you work harder to make sure that they know? And by the way, why wouldn't you choose to manufacture in yourself the desire and the need to care about a person? Because what we're going to show you in a bit is it's a choice, and you can choose it. You can choose it, and it doesn't mean it's fake. It means it's purposeful. There's a distinction between being inauthentic and purposeful. I guarantee you, how many people in this room are married? So in the process of developing ideally the love of your life, the great relationship of your life, there is a very purposeful process that you put forward. You thought about what you were going to wear, where you were going to go. You thought about what you were going to say. It was a very manipulative, strategic, systematic process by which you courted that individual. Did it make that fake? No. But it was purposeful because it was important. So all I'm saying is relationships can be purposeful and chosen, and yet we don't think about it that way in business. Right? So the intent is to show how we can create the safety that affords high performance. And this is where most processes and most of the work historically in this space has fallen short. They focus too much on the process and the steps and not the emotion, the engagement that is required. And what we've done is we've gone ahead and we have ascertained and dissected the anthropology, the sociology, and the psychology of high-performing teams. The anthropology, the sociology, and the psychology of individuals that have the kind of environment that will allow you to excel and be truly exceptional. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. The data is there. I'll give you some of the data. By the way, we've just recently created a joint venture. It hasn't been inked yet, so I'm crossing my fingers, with the Cisco organization. And what Cisco is interested in funding with us is a new entity akin to the Gallup company. And our focus is going to be just that. What are the direct relationships between high performance and the people sides of the business? Because oddly enough, because it's not measured, because there's not a science yet around it, most of you don't think about it. I thought that Tom's question was brilliant yesterday. How many of you have been promoted because your ability to manage talent? I mean, to some extent, it would have always been a component embedded in your results. But why is it that we aren't so specific? And it's because the science isn't yet as refined, and it will be with our efforts. And we've already refined it to a greater extent than I've ever seen it anywhere else, which is why John Chambers, who is really focusing on the technology side of collaborative sciences. If you think about what Chambers and Cisco does, it's around the technology of telepresence, the technology of networking, the technology of sharing information. And what he was looking for was an organization that was going to focus on the methodologies and the mindsets, because what they have found is that you throw telepresence in front of somebody and people don't yet know the rules in which to use the new technology to truly have more collaborative relationships. You know what it's like when you're in a meeting like this and what you're supposed to do, but what do you do when you've got technology as the mechanism for engagement? It's a whole different thought. So anyway, some of the things that we found is, number one, of the 55 highest performing teams, we did an isolated study of the 1,000. Of the 55 highest performing teams that we studied, the number one predictive element of that team's success was actually not past performance, but was social bonding. Deep social bonds were the number one predictive element of the highest performing of the 55 teams. Does that surprise you? If you know anything about Real Madrid, if you know anything about the basketball team called the Dream Team, you would realize that just because you have the best individual agents on a team does not mean that they will perform well as a group. Do you understand what I'm saying? In fact, the British actually send to Mount Everest every year all of their SWAT troops, all of their key troops to the base to climb, and they take the best performings out of each of the groups, our equivalent in the United States of the Navy SEALs, etc., and they put them in one team. That team of super leaders have never once placed in the top 10 teams. All right? So it's not just about the raw talent, it's about something else that we need to be able to figure out how to manufacture. The Gallup organization has proven that has proven that if you have a friend at work, I know the relationship between you and your chief marketing officer goes back a long way. If you have a friend at work, your employee engagement levels would be 30% higher on average than other employee engagement levels, which translates into somewhere close to a 17% higher level of productivity. Now, why is it that we have not stepped back and asked ourselves, if that's true, what we're really saying is that stronger relationships in the workplace yield a higher productivity? When's the last time you've seen a program that's purposefully increasing relationships in the workplace? It doesn't exist. The data isn't there yet. The acknowledgement of it as a science isn't there yet. But the great organizations have stumbled into it accidentally, and we're going to bring it to the forefront from a methodological perspective. Risk management, I was talking to Tom, mentioning one of his peers, Jamie Dimon. And one of the things we've done is we've interviewed many of the executive management of the top banks. Many of them have failed, many of them have succeeded, trying to understand what happened culturally that got them where they were. And what we found was that of the time, Jamie tells the story, he remembers when it was brought up by one of his people, the idea of the high-risk mortgage-backed securities and whether or not JP Morgan would invest in those. It was very interesting because at the time there was a lot of pressure for JP Morgan to do so. They were getting financial rewards in the marketplace that were much higher, and JP Morgan was getting kicked around by Wall Street for not investing in those instruments and not gaining the rewards that other banks were gaining. And he brought it to the team, and the team basically, very quickly, one young guy on the team said, I don't get it. I don't understand how these work. And an older guy on the team said, kid, if you don't get it, it probably means that it's too good to be true. They debated it for less than an hour, Jamie says, and in less than an hour they decided not to go there. I go over to another bank and have the same conversation. What was interesting was when the chairman brought the idea to the table, there was silence in the room. Nobody had a discussion. I asked the people when I talked to them offline, did you not have any doubts? Yeah, but if I thought that if I said I didn't get it, I'd look stupid. Somebody else said, are you kidding me? If I had said something, the guy whose division this was in, the next time I had a plan, I would have had a bullseye on my back and he would have made sure to torpedo my project. So I didn't say anything. From a risk management perspective, do you think that there was only one whistleblower at Enron? There was an entire culture of conflict avoidance that allowed an entire organization to do what was wrong, and they knew it was wrong. And it tanked some very significant stellar organizations, including Anderson, which was a great firm. I was being formerly from Deloitte. So from a risk management perspective, from a sales force, we work with sales forces. I mean, I can go on and on and on and show the relationships between actual performance metrics and these aspects of relational science. But I fear that at this stage, and certainly turnover rates, the engagement levels are higher, turnover rates significantly lower. You take your one of the things we did with Siemens organization is we took the high potential leadership group, 1,000 of the high potential leaders around the world. We organized them all into small groups of 4 that committed to not let each other fail during the 18-month period of their high potential leadership program. What we were able to do among the high potential leaders were decrease the turnover rate by 30% of these high potentials, just because, guess what? Nobody in this room, as much as, and as wonderful a company as this is, nobody in this room is loyal to a company. People are loyal to people. You're loyal to your leader, you're loyal to your manager, you're loyal to the man at the top that you believe has the vision that's taking you forward. You're not loyal to a company, it doesn't exist. So the high potential leaders, when you made them loyal to each other, they had that support structure that made them stay. Does that make sense? Do you tell me you get it? All right. Look, all of this said, let's go. You're ready to go to the roadmap to how? You get the concepts. May I pause for a moment and just maybe put myself out there and say, who is feeling, I don't get it, I don't agree. What about this? Let's just pause for a moment to take that, because if you're not with me so far, going into the roadmap for your success is kind of useless. I get the sense that I'm there, but I don't want to assume. Who would like to challenge what we've just talked about?
Quite the contrary, I'm totally with you.
Okay? I figured you would say that.
Well, I'm not challenging. I think what you're saying is perfectly good. But the big question in my mind is that social binding, by when or what kind of things we should look for, so therefore it's sustainable. Because social binding in various situations, I don't know.
Great, that's a very good question, and trust that the process addresses. So his question was, social bonding is very situational. Often environmental, has to do with the individuals at play, all of those different issues. The time that you spend together, whether it's virtual or you're in the same region or offices, whether you got stuck in an airport together or not. Frankly, whether or not somebody's just lost their mother. I mean, all of these attributes of humanity and empathy get molded in to what creates social bonding. What I'm going to tell you is that you can replicate and accelerate relationship development if you choose to do so, and now we need to move on and show how. Okay, so we're going to talk for a moment about the mindset. And the most important mindset that we first have to understand is the mindset of social connection. Do I like Ed? All right? Now, one of the things we train sales forces very early on is the best way to get your customer to like you is forget about trying to make them like you, and as soon as you walk into the room, desperately find ways to like them. The more you can do to like another person, research in advance, find out about their hobbies, empathize with this person, find out about the child that they have, humanize the person in front of you. The quicker you can humanize the person in front of you, the more you'll like them, and I guarantee you the relationship will follow. It's the easiest trick, so to speak. It's a skill set. It's a purposeful process. But I got to tell you, it's helped me wonderfully. Because in my life, I spent too much time being intimidated by people, not liking them, instead of searching for the reason I want to like them. Once I start searching for the reason I want to like them, I end up finding out that my life is a lot happier because I'm hanging around people that I actually enjoy. And it ends up being a choice. Sometimes people are more challenging than others. Here's the process by which you go about. Look around the room for a second. Look at these people for a second. Look at them. I want you to look at them, and in a second, what I want you to do is I want you to judge them. Now, you laugh, but you would have done it otherwise. I just gave you permission. In fact, you've been doing it all along. And part of the internal, and I won't say this because I don't want to make anybody feel embarrassed, but the conversations I've been having with all of you, the judgments are rampant here. Rampant. And by the way, it's okay. It makes you human. It stops you anthropologically from a tribal perspective. It stops you from going up and hugging a mountain lion. All right? Your prejudgment is this is going to hurt me. Therefore, you keep it away and you find reasons that this person is going to hurt me in their attributes and behaviors. Instead of trying to find the reasons you'll like somebody, you dial up the behaviors in that person that only reinforce that they're at risk to hurting you in some way, and they become the monsters that you'd like them to be to make you feel safe. It's human behavior. Does that make sense to you? Say you get it. Now, just as easily, you can do the opposite. By the way, what is another word for an inappropriate prejudgment? Inappropriate prejudgment. Prejudice. It's embedded in the word. This is what prejudice is about. Prejudice and the lack of embracing diversity is all about fear. Fear and insecurity of feeling safe. Fear and insecurity of not knowing and understanding, so we prejudge and we project. And the worst prejudices exist in this organization. And I'm not talking about prejudices of blacks, whites, women, etc. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the prejudices of corporate. The prejudices of corporate to corporate and regions. Prejudices of functions. Prejudices of roles. I mean, look, sales has always hated marketing. Marketing's always hated sales. I mean, that just goes back forever. And that's just prejudices. Now, finance, by the way, hates everybody. And everybody hates HR, but that's a whole separate issue. But those are just prejudices. If you really sat down and chose to understand, it's so wonderful. I mean, I get this wonderful opportunity to bound in the middle of you. And I have a conversation over here and understand the deep well intentions of somebody who's really working hard to make a difference in this organization because they care. And then I hear this person over there who hates this person. And hates what this person is doing and just is making fun of them and whatever. And they're not giving that person a shot. And I just wish that you just hear each other out in that regard, because what you don't understand is that it's so easy to judge. And that's a natural cowardice and a fallback. And none of us deserve that as individuals to have that aimed at you, and none of you will be productive and effective if that is your mode of social interaction. So cutting through the prejudgments is the first issue. And we've got tons of exercises we can do around that. I'm not going to go there. The next issue is dialing up passions. When you understand what really lights somebody up, then it's the first step beyond what if you can stop, so let me walk you through these steps. The first step is what you do in your own head, getting ready for a conversation. You suspending the judgments, you getting ready to have a good conversation, you getting ready to see the potential, you getting ready to collaborate, you getting ready to connect. It's all about you. It has nothing to do with who that person is. It's about your stuff, right? Second step, so that's the prejudgment. Second step is when you show up, finding in this person what they're passionate about. Because through other people's passion, the greatness of them shows up. And that could be their children. It could be their significant others. It could be the growth platform that they have. It could be the job, whatever it is. Now, once you do that, now very often what has to happen though is you've got to be more vulnerable to give a little bit of yourself in every one of these steps before you invite somebody else to do it. You can't just walk up to somebody and start peppering them with questions. You've got to be willing to let your guards down a little bit, to invite someone in, to make them feel what? What's the word? Safe. You have the onus of responsibility to develop the better relationship. It's a choice that you actually can make. You actually can make that choice. And once you feel that responsibility upon yourself, the first step is maybe talk about the positive stuff, the passions, the excitements. Now ultimately, to solidify a great relationship, it requires vulnerability. It requires struggles. It requires the tough stuff. Where you've solidified the greatest relationships is when you struggled together, historically and present. And you can create that and evoke it from a group of people by just asking. There's not a single person in this room that hasn't experienced past struggles. Everybody has. And by getting to the place where somebody's comfortable enough with you that they can share with you their past struggles, you will like them more, you will empathize with them more, because with empathy is a requirement for trust. And you can do this in a sales situation just as easily. We teach salespeople how to do this just as easily as we teach leadership teams. Imagine if you could accelerate the sales relationships as well as accelerating your team relationships. It's all the same people, right? So I'll give you just a quick story. I don't know who you think I am. Here's my background. I'm an Italian immigrant. I'm an Italian citizen. My father is an Italian immigrant as well. And we came over to the United States from Pittsburgh, all right? And when we were in Pittsburgh, my father was a steel worker, and my mother was a cleaning lady. And the commitment to be in the United States was all about education. They wanted to make sure that their son had a great education. And they sacrificed everything and worked their fingers off to be able to do that, as did I. I've had jobs ever since I can remember. My very first job was sweeping floors at one of my father's construction sites, and he fired me. My mother actually came and negotiated the severance agreement, so it was actually my first real test. But they got me into a school, and it's told in the other book, Never Eat Alone. They got me into a school, which is a high-end private school that was owned by the Mellon family, the Mellon Bank, Mellon family. And that family did homeschooling for their children, and this is what this was, homeschooling for the rich kids in the Pittsburgh area. And my father talked his way into getting me into this school by going to the CEO of his company and asking whether or not his son could get into this school. And here we were driving up in a beat-up, green, rust-stained Nova. And my peers, there were only 8 kids in the entire school. And my peers had bodyguards and chauffeur-driven limousines. Now, children can be cruel, as we all know, no matter what the country is. And what would happen would we would have to get a school uniform that you would have to buy in a retail store called Brooks Brothers, which we couldn't afford. So my mother would go down to the local Salvation Army, and we would root around in bins of big clothing, trying to find where the rich kids had left their clothes from the previous years. And I hated that trip. I hated that trip so much because the fear that one of my classmates would come in dropping off clothes. And it wasn't until 5th grade that it actually happened, but it did. And this woman, this girl came in, And she saw me. And I was trying on a green blazer, and I dove into the bin of clothes because I was afraid that, that she'd say something. And she left, and she didn't until the next day. So the next day, she comes into school, and she pushes me down. She grabs my jacket. Gustavo's looking at me with judgment. She was a bigger girl, okay? And she showed that somebody else's name was written in the back of my jacket. It absolutely crushed me. But it perhaps was one of the best things that it did for me in terms of my career, because it gave me a drive and ambition that was off the chart. It was never going to feel like that again. I was going to work harder. I was going to study more. I was going to do everything that I could possibly do. And if you could tell by the bitterness in my voice, that's another thing. And by the way, her name was Connie Semler. Okay, I put that up there. And what it did for me is it gave me a drive and ambition, a fuel that propelled me in ways that was amazing. No, she's not. I did actually talk to her about 2 months ago. I did. She talked to her too. She's doing just fine. She actually called me the day after I talked about her on CNBC. So, just don't screw with a writer. That's one thing you just got to, that's a good lesson to learn. So anyway, the point is that, but here's, what did it do to me as a leader? Right? It made me one of the most driven, insecure leaders you could possibly imagine. When I would become insecure, I would get big. I would get big, and I would be prideful, and anything that would perhaps hurt me or challenge me, I would lash out against as a leader. And the concept of real collaboration wasn't a big piece of my forte. And it wasn't until, and when I published a book and it was successful, and I still felt like I was this guy. I got a picture of it. I felt like I was drowning in the deep end of a swimming pool, and everybody else was walking around with a cocktail, having a lovely time at the pool party. And I was going under for the third time. I felt lost, I felt miserable, and yet from the outside world they thought I was successful. Why do you think nobody said anything to me at that point in time in my life? Anybody have any ideas? Perhaps they didn't like me. Some of them sure didn't. I look back and I'm embarrassed by some of my behaviors. They certainly didn't know me because I didn't let them. They didn't care. What are some of the other reasons they didn't say anything? I didn't make it safe. Some of them didn't even know. I hid it very well. I hid my insecurities and my fears very well because I felt that I needed to. And it was a friend of mine that came to me. He was actually a client at the time, and he said, "Keith, you look like an idiot. Your dreams and your aspirations of what you're trying to do in this world, in the business world, are getting further away from you, not closer. And until you begin to be more elegant," and he's really just talking about slowing down and accepting who I was, the authenticity of who I was. And it was a great quote last night from the gentleman from the cultural dinner, talking about relaxing and letting go of yourself to be the best self that you can be. It's an old Chinese saying. And that's what I needed to do. And it was powerful to me. This is a client, this was a friend, and he saw who I really was and still cared about me, still liked me, still told me the truth. And it became contagious to me. Because all of a sudden I realized that other people saw this. But they either didn't care enough or they were too afraid to come and tell me what I could do to be a better leader. There's not a single one of you in here that don't have career-crippling habits. Truly. I don't care how successful you've been. We all in this room as humans create our own glass ceilings that is holding ourselves back. And if you really want to be successful in life, you will embrace a group of people around you to tell you what those glass ceilings are and to tell you when you're doing them. Because they're habits, and they're habits and behaviors that are almost addictions. Our leadership failures are addictions to us because as a friend of mine once said, what got you here won't get you there. And your ability to begin to diagnose, but why do we feel that we got to diagnose these things with covert 360-degree reviews? Why do we feel that we've got to have these conversations, then you and your manager share them quietly to each other? The highest performing teams all know what these attributes are, and by the way, they're called personal development goals. And they're open because you're human, and if you care and respect and like each other, you know what your flaws are, and they're okay. And we're going to work to make your flaws better, to make you a better professional. And we're going to identify them in the context of the staff meeting. The staff meeting becomes the vehicle to transform you and your behaviors. The staff meeting becomes the vehicle to create your own learning goals and plans. Think about that for a moment. Think about that. When we think about turning a staff meeting into a collaborative problem-solving entity, a few things begin to occur. Number one, if you have high-impact teams through collaborative problem-solving, and you actually think of your staff meeting as that unit that has your back, you begin to understand the psychology of a high-performing team. And you practice the psychology of a high-performing team. You begin to create innovative solutions because you can take risks as a team. You can bust through and say what you're thinking. You also have strategic alignment naturally. You don't have to sell a program. The program was mutually developed and everybody has their voice and nobody is resentful that you have to worry about buy-in later because they're not going to give it to you later. If you use, how many times do we use our staff meeting for information sharing? What a wasted use of time. You've got the power of 5 to 10 or however many individuals in the room, and what do? We share information which we could have shared if you had enough discipline in a PowerPoint presentation sent out in advance, or a video clip that the leader gave that said, here's what I need to share. I promise you what we have seen is meetings like this, to only 25% of the information that's shared, if you're lucky, is retained. And yet we spend all these time and money to doing it. Information sharing is not the best use of a group of people in the audience, and every one of you learn and hear differently anyway. It's engagement, it's dialogue, it's debate, it's moving things forward that's the best use of a combined group of individuals in a collaborative session. That's where you get the kind of innovative and strategic alignment. Talking about engagement, you engage somebody literally. Connection to the customer. Because what we begin to do, and this is what we're doing on our breakout session today, every initiative and every team needs to create its own relationship action plan. And I'll get to that in a moment. And continual personal improvement, because you commit to each other, to making each other better. Imagine if everybody in your team, think about this for a moment, everybody in your team picked 2 goals for the year. One skills-based development and one leadership-based development. And you debated it as a team as to what you needed to learn to be a better leader and what you needed to learn from a skills-based perspective. And then on a monthly basis, you reported that back to your team. This is, and on the leadership piece, they'll call you when they haven't seen the change. And on the skills piece, you'll say, well, I called 2 consultants, I went to this class, I read this book. To think that HR can formulate a leadership, a learning roadmap for this entire organization and every individual in it is ridiculous. Stop thinking that HR's role is talent management, and stop thinking that HR's role is training and development. The most powerful training and development and talent management happens when you are motivated with your leadership team to grow. Informal learning has always been 70% of learning. Always been 70% of learning. The problem is that now, with flattened organizations and fewer middle managers, nobody's a coach anymore. Nobody has time to do the informal learning. Nobody has time for the mentoring programs. We've got to build that back into everybody in this room's responsibility and stop thinking that it's some central failure. It's your job. And we begin to build the leadership capacity so that all of you take this out to the hundreds of thousands of people that you have working for you. And the feeling that you're having right now, the little sense of hope or feeling that I could live my life better, is what each of you becomes ambassadors to your people. as individuals organically, and we don't need a book to describe it. It's just how you are. Feedback and fighting is something you'll learn. And here are a couple of simple rules. I want to show you how we can create process in this concept. So if you bring collaboration to the forefront of a group, how am I doing on time? Oh, good. Maybe. Oh, really? Okay. So if you bring the concept of collaboration to the table, here's a new rule to think about. Feedback is a gift. Do you believe it or not? Do you believe that feedback is a gift to you? Or do you see it as a threat? Or do you see it as an affront? Of course, it depends upon who it's from, right? But I have to say that if you're really smart, you wouldn't give a damn who it's from. You'd still see it as a gift. Because I would rather know what my enemies are really thinking than not. Because then I can deal with that information transparently. The problem is we act like 2-year-olds where it's like, oh my God, the entire audience is gone. Oh no, there they are. And what we do, when we think that if we don't hear the information, it doesn't exist. That's just not true. You want to hear the information. You need to have the candor. Information is power. So if you believe feedback's a gift, then when somebody gives, I overheard a conversation in an elevator yesterday where somebody was giving somebody a piece of feedback. And the instant piece of feedback that person had was, I didn't do that. The person, had said, well, during this presentation you were doing this, this, or this. And they're like, no, I didn't. I don't do that. And I certainly didn't do it 100%. And I sat there and thought, wow, that person really doesn't see feedback as a gift. And then the other person became apologetic and was saying, no, I'm just trying to coach you a little bit. And it's like, please, the only answer for a piece of feedback is thank you. Thank you. Because if you say anything other than that, you're going to shut that person down and not get that valuable flow of information anymore. Now, you say thank you, and then what do you do with that data? You go triangulate it. Right, Joe? You got a piece of data, now we're going to go try to figure out how much of this data is accurate. And we're going to go collect a bunch of data from a bunch of other people. And then once we get the data, who owns the analysis and the answer? I do. I don't care about your feedback because I own the analysis. I own the analysis. You can tell me all you want. I then control the analysis and feedback. Then I'll come back to you and say, thank you very much. I did collect that. If you really want to encourage somebody, thank you very much. I did collect the data, and you're absolutely right. People told me the same thing. Or you can come back and say, I didn't understand your concept, and I wanted to ask you more about it. You can always ask for more information. Make people safe. Your job in a meeting is to make people safe if you want to receive the feedback, and make people safe when you're giving it to them. So you need to perhaps ask permission in advance of it. I have some ideas that I thought might make you a little bit better, and the next time you present, would you like to hear it? Making somebody safe and inviting them in before you give them the feedback is critical. Now, both of us are responsible, so when you're receiving feedback, you make them feel safe. Thank you. Give me more. Tell me more all the time. And just realize that it's all just data, and that ultimately you control. Now, that's important because if you're a culture that believes in consensus, this doesn't work. Because you think that if you open yourself up for data, now you got to do something with that damn data. When in actuality, if you're still the leader, you don't have to do anything with the data because you don't have to gain consensus. Consensus is something, it's a nice to have, it's not a necessary, and you're going to make the best decision. And that's where bold decisions and that's where breakthrough occurs. Collect all the data and make the best decision, and then if you have a culture where if I've given you the feedback, damn it, I should not feel responsibility that you should do anything with it. It's a gift. I've given it. You can re-gift it if you want. You can ignore it. Do anything you want. But I've got it off my chest. Now you're the person I like and care for and want to see successful. Tell me what you're going to do with all the data you've gotten. Now let's go. Now that's the kind of culture that you're looking for. I'm going to go back, and because I got the slides, I got the time to do it. Here's a question I want you to break up into groups of 3 in the room. Groups of 3. And you can choose whoever you want. You can get up and move around if you want, whatever. But it'd be even good if serendipitously you stay exactly where you are coincidentally and just grab a group. Here's the question you're going to reveal and discuss with each other. Very simple question. What struggle of your life? What struggle of your life helps to define who you are today? What struggle of your life defines who you are today? It doesn't have to be as elaborate as the one that I had, or as clear. It does, and by the way, if you're really searching and you can't figure any, I can't even imagine not figuring any struggle. And it doesn't have to happen from childhood. I mean, there are people who have experienced these, whatever it is, wonderful moments. Martin and I had a great conversation at lunch the other day, and yours happened in your early professional days. But what aspects of your life, experiences, struggles, and I'll let you, if you really don't want to go to the struggle area, then you can go to the experience area. What experience of your life defines heavily who you are today? And it can be a positive one if you choose. But I'm saying what you're doing in the process is you're going to passion and dream when you share a positive experience that influences who you are. You will have less connectivity with somebody than if you share a struggle with somebody that defines who you are. But that's your call. The key is to be able to navigate through with your own path, right? Now, what's more important, that as you're sharing as a group of three, it's less important what you say, and it's more important what you two do. So as he's sharing, what are you going to do? You're going to listen. That would be a good start. So that's a good one, right? Blackberries are probably not optional at this stage, okay? What would be the other things that you might do as someone shares an experience that defines who they are? What? Empathize. Empathize. So for instance, you might give a damn. You might care. Which, by the way, not to be flip, is actually a choice. It's actually a choice. Tuning yourself in and deciding to walk into what you're about to do and choosing to care is a choice. And it's one that I've experienced less than I'd like to see in this organization as I've been meeting you and experiencing you. When you meet new people, it's about small talk. No. You can choose to go deeper. You can choose to accelerate the relationship purposefully. And as I mentioned before, the first thing is you're going to choose as you're walking into a new conversation to find a reason to care about someone. And this way it's easy. They're about to share with you exactly the reason you're going to care about them, but you need to choose to turn into that. Because here's what's in this room, by the way. There are people in this room who are passionate and excited about things in their life. There are people in this room who feel like they've been beaten up. There are people in this room who have parents with Alzheimer's, and they're struggling with that right now. There are people in this room who may have their own health issues. There are people in this room who may have just given birth to wonderful new, children and grandchildren. It's the love of their life and the excitement, and there are others who are really worried about their kids. I mean, that's the people here, right? And this is an organization that understands care. I do believe you do. But now let's think about going to that mode in a business context to hear what your associates are about to share with you about their background. It's a choice that I want you to experience making, because how dare we not? How dare we not? Because for a lot of us in this room, what simple thing that you're about to share, it's not a big deal, actually. You'll find it's less of a big deal soon, is very difficult. And in fact, it's called effective forecasting and mortality salience. What that really means is, many of you in this room, with this exercise, are so afraid of it, you think you're going to die. You effectively forecast the worst possible outcome to the point of death. And it actually, psychologically, is very reasonable. It goes back to early childhood beliefs, where you were fearful as a child. This actually scares us as parents. Children get fearful as children that if they don't adhere to the social norms of the family, they'll be put out and they will die. That's the reptilian brain going on in their head. Your children are working hard to adhere to a social norm. Some of you wish they'd work harder. To adhere to a social norm to the point where they are getting so ingrained and habituated that it will impact them for the rest of their life. Some of them are becoming conflict avoidant as we speak. And they're afraid of displeasing someone. Or they're becoming pleasers. Or they're becoming, whatever they are. We create these things very early on that set molds as to who we are and how we deal with others. And it's not your fault. We've all done it. It just happens. It's what the human behavior does. So this stuff is true. And the fears you have, it's like if you ever said to somebody, it's like, oh, I couldn't go up and talk to that person, I die. You really feel that. So you're not going to die, and we're going to prove it. And this is the part of the instructional design of tasting and experiencing a social risk to the point that you can live. And we do the same thing with candor. We can't do it in this room, in this context, and the time we have, but you can train people to take risks they wouldn't have taken otherwise and live through it and get excited. And that's how you change behaviors in an organization. Small incremental tastes of success. So, what struggle of your life defines to some extent who you are today? Talk about it and care. Everybody gets about 3 minutes each for this, okay? So groups of 3. No more than 3 or you won't get through. The good news is you have a lifetime to practice this. And that is the expectation, by the way. Presumably the lunch you're about to have, I'd like you to continue to have these conversations. You know, at events like this, sales meetings, etc., really there should be 2 mantras. For instance, do you ever host large events for customers, you know, etc.? Here's the 2 things that you could say at the beginning of an event like that. If you could lead an event like that by letting everybody in the room know that this event would be much more powerful if 2 things were to occur. Number 1, everybody in the room would find ways to care about the people that they were talking to at the cocktail receptions. In other words, just literally tell them that your job is let people know that finding opportunities to actually dive into real conversation and giving them that motivation in the early part of an event literally transforms the tenor of the event going forward. The second thing is, imagine if everybody around at the event were to walk around saying, how can I help you? Who do you want to meet? What do you want to learn? Why did you come here? So turn everybody into the event into a host. And you literally, as leaders of the event, all you've got to do is tell them that. And let them know that the mantra is, how can I help you? What if, literally, at the beginning, what if for the rest of this event, your mantra was, how can I help you? How can I help you? And you were to view that not with some great ego of saying, what do you mean help me? I don't need help. But instead, to view that as an opening opportunity to talk about what's going on in your business and what you could actually share with each other. I mean, when you bring together this power, I promise you're not tapping into this power. The power in this room has nothing to do with any of the presentations we've seen at the front. The power of this room would come when all of you were to actually decide you gave a damn enough about each other that you would commit to each other. I'm going to show you a couple of other tools. Now the good news is in our breakout today, I'm going to be going around for 30-second increments. We're going to be getting into greater level of detail on collaborative problem solving and how to do that in your staff meetings. So make sure you bring the handout with you to your event. All of you who are interested can sign up afterward for getting a copy of the book, and most of the methodology is in here, but it's not, remember, this is not just about professional development, it's your continuous personal development. As an individual, you apply this in your life. In the United States, we did a survey and asked, who has your back? 50% of Americans didn't know who had their back. 60% of those who didn't know who had their back were married. Now what's interesting is, these philosophies, I'm often accused of trying to teach the world to be Latin. Because as an Italian, you lead with relationships. In Asia, you lead with relationships. Relationships are the dominant currency that you have. It's the Americans that are transactional. We pretend not to be, because we bound into a room with lots of openness, but we get to the business before we get to the people. Now, this is the international division. There are more people in this room who understand how really business gets done than those who don't. So make sure that you stop being so damn judgmental. For those of you who get it, stop being prideful and judgmental and dismissive of the people who don't. Why don't you help them? Why don't you help them? We can talk about some of that in the breakout. The rules that I'm going to ask you to apply are pretty simple as we go forward. And again, we're going to talk about the breakout. The 4 simple rules of great teams are: take a risk and say what you're saying. Say what you're thinking. Take a risk, say what you're thinking. Give a damn enough to forgive. Because we're all going to act like jerks. And we're all going to be off base. Give a damn enough to forgive. Once a decision's made, don't let each other fail. Yep. Give a damn enough to forgive. Care about each other enough to excuse our flaws. Care about each other enough to accept each other for who we are and have that respect. And then without results, we're done. This is a simple 4 steps that if every one of your teams adopted these simple rules and their behaviors, and more importantly, anytime you saw a violation of any of those rules, it felt like bile in your mouth. You got sick. Just like you would get sick today if there was an ethical violation going on in your midst, or if somebody was cheating on their expenses. It's disgusting. Any violation of norm aside from those, I mean, if you violate those, it should be disgusting. That's when you have a strong sense of who you are and engagement as an organization. I want to end with a quick story about my father. This is my pop. This was taken, my sister wrote that underneath. This was taken a couple of years before he died. Proud, steelworking father, immigrant, Italian, who his entire life was invested in his son. When I was 8 years old, we had been unemployed in our family for 6 months. And back then, when you were unemployed for 6 months, when you were hired back as what was called a new man, meaning you lost your pension. My father had worked for the company for 25 years and had lost his pension when he got dismissed. So we're 8 years old here, right? And Dad and I did a ritual every Saturday. We would go to the Italian market. We'd get the bread and the olive oil and the meats. And then we'd drive home. And on the way home, we'd stop along the side of the road, and Dad would tell me stories. And we'd eat this little chunk of pepperoni and fresh Italian bread. And mostly we did that because Mom never let us eat that crap at home. So we had to do it before we got home. So we're sitting there along the side of the road, and Dad's telling me stories, and then he stops. And he looks up along the side of the road, and this is November now in Pittsburgh, quite cold. And we were not going to be able to afford the Christmas presents for the year. And Dad gets out of the car, and a proud steelworker walks up, and he grabs out of this pile of trash a big wheel. I don't know if this translates well, but it's a small toy. It's a plastic 3-wheel tricycle, so to speak. He grabs a big wheel out of the trash for his son's Christmas present, and because he knew that if he went home and came back, it might not be there anymore. But he doesn't just grab it and put it in the car. He walks up the sidewalk and to ask whether he can have it. Because Dad always used to drive this message home to me. Never be afraid to ask. The worst anybody could ever say is no. Well, I learned that lesson time and time again, so that wasn't the powerful lesson of that day. But he's walking up, he's knocking on the door, and the woman came to the door, and she's expressing with her hands, of course you can have the big wheel. We're all Italian in that neighborhood, so of course you can have the big wheel. And she says, wait a second. And I forgot to tell you, I'm hiding in the back of the car because I'm afraid of Connie Semler or somebody going by and seeing us. And so she goes into the garage and she pulls out a bicycle. And at this point, I'm peeking up over the door. I'm like, I don't care. I'm up out of the car. I'm walking up the sidewalk because I got the idea that this bicycle was about to be mine. And I'm going up and I'm there, and she sees me, and she goes back into the garage. And she pulls up the garage door, and she says to my father, "Sir, this may be inappropriate, but may I give your son this go-kart, this mechanical go-kart, for his Christmas present?" And I have pictures today of literally of me on this go-kart with a big helmet, and I couldn't even reach the gas pedal. My dad had to put like blocks of wood on the gas pedal for me to be able to reach it. And I'm like thinking, this is the best Christmas ever, right? Well, to this very day, I always go home and I see my mother at Christmas. And I always go by that old house, which is this old, beautiful Victorian home right across from the country club where I used to work as a kid. And I sit there, and my father has passed away 10 years ago. And I use that as a moment to talk to my father and reflect a little bit about my life. And I always try to remember one very important thing, and that is how that woman must have felt on Christmas Eve. Think about this for a moment. She's doing her dishes, maybe the grandkids have come home, and she's sitting here thinking about that family that she helped. Who got the greater gift that Christmas? She did. There are people in your lives today who are waiting for every one of you to let them in. There are people in your lives who would like to have stronger relationships with you, who want you to respect them enough to invite them in. There may be significant others, and as I say that, you know who some of them are. There may be team members of yours who are on the edges today that you need to choose to invite them in. There are individuals out there who the greatest gift you could give them is allowing them to help you and to help the mission that you have in this planet. And it's a mutual mission that both of you commit to making a difference. And it's a choice that every one of us can make. And it's tough for me to make it and let my guard down to do it. It always was. And every day I've got to remind myself. So as we become ambassadors to this idea in our organizations, the greatest gift you're going to give yourself is to be of service and teach this way of thinking to others, because every day it will hold you accountable to be the better individual that you deserve to be for not only higher performance, but just a little bit more joy that we long to have anyway in our day-to-day lives. Good luck, and God bless.